Hi YouTube, it's Kathy, and this is my April 2022 reading wrap-up. If you're not already aware, I do weekly entertainment wrap-ups of everything I read, watch, and listen to, but today we're just talking about the books. I'm going to start with my nerdy hardcore stats and charts and then get into what I read. Also, I put chapter markers in all of my videos, so if you look down below, if you need to refer back to anything, that is an excellent resource to use, especially if you're like, wait, what was that one book called again? If you haven't already subscribed to my channel, please consider doing that and hit the notification bell in case it actually does anything. In April, I read 14 books for a total of 4,756 pages. That takes into account converting audiobook minutes to pages, so 2,447 of those pages were actually about 80 hours of audio. The age breakdown for these books was 10 adult books, 3 YA books, and 1 middle grade book. I read 12 novels, 1 novella, and 1 anthology. This month, half of what I read was historical fiction, followed by nonfiction, contemporary, and fantasy. If you adjust by page count, you realize historical fiction books are big. Most of these books were from the library, but I also read some from NetGalley, and others were presents for my birthday. I read 7 audiobooks, 4 ebooks, 2 paperbacks, and 1 hardcover. The biggest chunk of my books were in the 300 to 399 pages range, and everything was published in the 2020s. The majority of these books were written by female authors, and half the protagonists were female. In terms of setting, the USA took half the slots, but I also read books set in the UK, Germany, China, France, and Canada. In terms of diversity of subject matter, this pie chart ended up looking really weird, but I read books with queer rep, disability rep, books with more than 1 marginalization, and a few with none. In terms of star ratings, this month I had 1 3-star read, 1 3.5-star read, 3 4-star reads, 3 4.5-star reads, and 6 5-star reads. Let's start with the lowest rated book and work our way up to the highest, shall we? So is the scariest part of the video because I'm moving over, but I don't have a viewfinder, so I have no idea if this is a good place to be in frame or not. I tested it earlier, but who knows? My 3-star read this month was Reputation by Lex Croucher. I knew this book was coming out because Lex is really good friends with Rosianna Halse Rojas, who I follow online. This is a fish out of water type story about a girl who goes to live with an aunt and uncle in the countryside and has to integrate into that society, and she finds this very rich and influential new friend and kind of becomes part of that society. However, these people are really mean, and if you're not on the inside, you're on the outside, and she has some complicated feelings about that. However, this is one of those books where it took way too long for the main character to catch up with the fact that the people she's hanging out with are absolute bastards, and maybe she should say something or just give this up because what is status anyway? I say that as somebody who lives in the modern age and also doesn't really care all that much about status because I'm, somewhere in the middle. I'm comfortable enough that I don't have to care about it, but I'm not so high up that I have to worry about keeping it. As you can also tell from the cover, this is set sometime in the past. I can't remember exactly which era this is in. This basically felt like Mean Girls, but in fancy dresses. It wasn't terrible. There were some moments where I really felt for the characters, but overall this was just kind of eh. My 3.5-star read was The Most Dazzling Girl in Berlin. This is a book written in poetry, and it takes place in Berlin in, I believe, the 1930s, probably more so the 1940s. Our main character is somebody who is just aged out of the orphanage, so she's gone into Berlin to try to find a job, and she ends up working in a queer nightclub. If you're a fan of Cabaret, basically that was a comp title mentioned for this book, and I went, yes, I want it, whatever it is, it's fine. And then I realized it was poetry, and then I realized I'd read historical fiction from this author that was written in poetry before, and I was like, oh, okay, yes, this makes sense to me. Obviously, there's going to be some difficult subject matter in this one, but I absolutely enjoyed it. And sped through it because even though it is many, many pages, obviously there's less text on each page because it's poetry. On to my 4-star reads, the first one being Lit Stitch. This is a book put out by Book Riot, and it has 25 different cross-stitch patterns that are bookish. The biggest reason why I only read 14 books this month is because I was doing a lot of cross-stitching. In fact, this was a hobby I had in my childhood that I just picked up this month, and I believe I'm on my 7th project. I checked this book out of the library and ended up ordering my own copy because I'm going to want to make a bunch of the different patterns that are in this book. There's different bookmarks or wall displays, and when I make them, I will show them to you. This also had a decent amount of introduction information. It could have had a little bit more for my taste, but overall it's almost enough for any beginner to just pick it up and then pick up the hobby. Next we have When We Lost Our Heads by Heather O'Neill. This is another historical fiction, but this one is set in the Industrial Revolution in Montreal. Most particularly, it's set on 2 different miles, the Golden Mile and the Squalid Mile. It's mostly set on the Golden Mile, which is where a lot of English-speaking folks lived in Montreal, and these are your more high-class status type folk. Although by the end of this book it's really about a huge cast of characters, we start out with two characters, Marie and Sadie. Marie is that child that's just up and coming and bright and imaginative and everything is sunshine and rainbows because her father owns a sugar factory and she's going to inherit it. Sadie, on the other hand, is much more dour and kind of like the goth kid of that era, but then she takes it a little bit further with sometimes murdering animals, because why not? They form a very unlikely but very intense friendship, and then something happens to drive them apart, and this book takes place over about 20 years, so we get to see how all of that plays out with these other cast of characters around them. I didn't really know much about this book going into it. I think I knew that it took place in Montreal and that was about it, and that's why I decided to listen to it. But this unexpectedly had a bunch of queer characters and a bunch of queer content, so if you're looking for that in your historical fiction, here is some. In fact, one of the characters actually starts writing erotica, and that's a whole big thing in this, so if that's your jam, there it is. It was a little bit much at times for my ace self, but it wasn't a lot of explicit scenes on the page. They were just kind of talked about. This month I also read Our Violent Ends, which is the second in a duology that is set in 1920 Shanghai. This is Romeo and Juliet imagining between two households, both alike in dignity in Shanghai of the time, although there are other political parties at play here. And I guess a very good way to get me to read something that is very political and has many parties to consider is have it be a retelling of something I've read before. Again, another historical fiction with queer characters not erased in it, which was just lovely to see. Obviously, being a second in a duology, there's not too much I can tell you about this other than I ended up enjoying it and I thought it did a retelling justice. On to my 4.5 star reads, the first one being The Christie Affair. I also made a separate video about this, which I'll link down below, for the One Scene for Hope project. That's a project where you talk about a piece of media that has one scene that particularly evokes hope in you, and that's a project you can actually take part in if you would like, so as I said, that will be linked down below. Check it out after this. This book takes place around the 10-day period in December of 1926 where Agatha Christie went missing. Because this is a historical event, we know she came back, and we know that she just said she didn't know what she did, she didn't know what happened during that time frame, and she never let us know what she did during that time frame. The interesting hook of this book is it's told from the perspective of her husband's mistress. Pretty quickly into the book, you come to realize that Nan is an unreliable narrator, mostly because she describes scenes where she was not present, and she even makes kind of a mention about, you might think that I shouldn't know what happened here, but I definitely do, and here's why. Which, now that I think about it, makes me think a little bit about Miss Marple books, because at least the one that I read, Miss Marple wasn't even present for a bunch of it, but she also figured out what was going on, and that made no sense to me. I thought that this was both an interesting and imaginative take on that time frame, but then it also gave us this history of this character, and a lot of that tied in together, and there was also a murder mystery, because why not? Next we have She Gets the Girl. This is about two girls that end up going to the same university, and they both have girl troubles. One of them has been in love with this girl from her high school, who is also attending the same university, for 4 years, but she hasn't actually, talked to her, asked her out on a date, anything like that. She's been way too scared. She doesn't really have the skills, if you will. Our other character wants to do the long distance thing with her girlfriend, but they have a fight the night she's meant to leave, and then she ends up having to try to prove herself to the girlfriend that she can do the long distance thing. The way she decides to prove that she can behave herself is she befriends the first girl and is basically giving her dating advice, but keeping her at this friendship distance, because there's obviously nothing between them, right? As this is a romance, I think you can probably guess where this goes, but also I loved it. I love the way these characters interacted. I love these characters figuring things out for themselves. This was just really lovely. Also, this book is written by two women who are each other's wives, and that just makes it more adorable. Finally, for this, come on, voice. Alright, I forgot to take my allergy pill this morning and my voice decided to give out until I took it, so here we are. I love allergies, they're wonderful. I love that I feel them even though it's raining, it's great. Finally, for this category, we have One for All. This is a book that is sold as a gender-bent retelling of The Three Musketeers. I have a feeling, even though I still haven't done my research, that this is actually meant to take place after The Three Musketeers, and our protagonist's father might have been one of the Three Musketeers, but I've never read or watched any adaptation of The Three Musketeers, so this is just me guessing. When our main character was about 12, she started having dizzy spells, and this is something that she's trying to work through, but many doctors aren't listening to her and basically just saying, it's all in your head, or, women being hysterical. However, from a young age, her father has taught her fencing though, so that is something she still does even though she gets dizzy and has to obviously sit down every once in a while and manage her condition. Her mother wants to get her married off, but society has basically told her that's probably not going to happen because she's tainted or whatever you want to say, which obviously we know in this day and age is garbage, nonsense, but people are still meant to feel this way, and that makes me so mad. Because of reasons that I won't tell you about because it spoils things in the book, she ends up going to this academy and ends up using her powers for good. There's intrigue, there's mystery, there's flirtation, there's fancy 1600s France things happening. This was a very good time. I very much enjoyed this, and I'm so happy my friend Anna sent me a copy for my birthday, because this is the one book I wanted to read during the Disability Readathon, which takes place all throughout April. I'm so glad I was able to do that. On to my 5-star reads. The first book that I read this month was Hood Feminism. This is a book about the people that feminism has left behind. What I really enjoyed about this is it has elements of memoir to it, but it's broken up into different chapters and different subjects that people don't necessarily immediately think about how they connect to feminism, and yet they do. If you look at anything long enough, it connects to feminism. And what I really appreciated about this book was pointing out these things that people don't always think about, and oftentimes are a daily struggle for people that aren't exactly like me. Another historical fiction book that I read this month was Five Little Indians. I believe this book also recently just won the Canada Reads Prize, which is when 5 celebrities in Canada pick a book each and then do debates as to why this is the one book that Canada should read. This book follows 5 different Indigenous characters that all happen to go to the same residential school. Originally, when I talked about this book in my weekly wrap-up, I said that it centered around the 60s scoop, and I was inaccurate. The author actually showed up in the comments of that video to tell me that this happened before the 60s scoop, and she is absolutely correct. I just conflated when they got out of the school and when they were taken for the school. So I do apologize for that. Obviously, the 60s wasn't the first time that Indigenous children were taken from their families. It was happening way before that, and it was happening up until relatively recently. However, a large section of this book takes place in the early 1960s and then a little bit later, as this is a very long generational family book. And it shows not only the abuse that was faced, but also the consequences of that. I don't know who is participating in Canada Reads this year, and I don't know if they actually even choose the books that they are going to champion, but this one is definitely one that all Canadians should read. Next, we have The King of Infinite Space by Lindsay Fay. I knew nothing about this book going into it. I just saw that Lindsay Fay had a book that I hadn't read yet and went, yes please. It then took me approximately a chapter and a half to realize that this is a Hamlet retelling in modern day. And honestly, if that's not a selling point for you, I don't know if you want to listen to the rest of this, but I absolutely love this. This is told from 3 different perspectives: Ben, who is our Hamlet character, Leah, who's our Ophelia character, and Horatio, who is our Horatio character. However, this one also has elements of queerness. There's also witches to be found. There's a whole different side thing that I thought was going on from the very beginning, but the book threw enough curveballs at me that I thought maybe I'm just wrong, and then I wasn't, and it was delightful. I also really enjoyed that elements from different Shakespeare plays were just kind of tossed in here every once in a while. I'm sure if I'd read more Shakespeare, I would pick up on more references, but I picked up on a few that weren't from Hamlet that were in this, so I felt kind of proud of myself. Ben is also neurodivergent. This takes place around a theater. This ticked a lot of boxes for me. I highly, highly suggest reading it. And if audiobooks are your things, the audiobook was amazing. With these last 3 books, I feel like I should just shake them up, throw them in the air, and see how they land, and that's how I'll talk about them, because it is very hard to rank them, and I think that ranking things is just difficult and weird, but I had to write them down in my notes in an order, so that's what I did. Just know that all of these are just top tier. First, we have I Kiss Shara Wheeler by Casey McQuiston. This one actually comes out this week. If I get my act in order, it comes out today as I'm posting this, but I might not get this edited in time. I didn't know anything about this book going into it besides it's Casey McQuiston's 3rd book. I love their writing, and it's YA. Those are the things I knew about it. As you start this book, you realize a few things. Our main character is named Chloe. She has a vendetta against Shara Wheeler because they're both neck and neck to be valedictorian, and they've never really gotten along with each other in the 4 years that Chloe has lived in this small Alabama town where they go to the same Christian academy. Shara's father is also the principal there, and everyone treats her like royalty. She's very, very much that perfect person that you want to hate. At least Chloe definitely wants to hate her. However, a couple of days previous to the book opening, Shara kissed her out of nowhere and she has no idea what to feel about that, and then Shara just disappears from prom. And now that's all anyone can talk about, and Chloe wants to track her down to make sure that when she wins valedictorian, she wins not because Shara decided to go off on an adventure or disappear or whatever. She's also joined on this Find Shara quest by Shara's boyfriend as well as her next door neighbor. This had great mystery, intrigue, people just figuring out themselves, which is just all that high school really is. And I think if you're anything like me, you are very much going to enjoy this one. Penultimately, we have A Kind of Spark by Elle McNichol. This is my middle grade book that I read this month. This book takes place in a small Scottish town just outside of Edinburgh, and our main character is autistic. She also has two older sisters. They are twins, and one of them is also autistic. So she really has a closer relationship with that sibling. However, this school year is a little bit tough because the person that used to be her best friend has kind of moved away from her since her diagnosis and is kind of hanging out with this person who bullies her all the time, and the teacher that they have is not the nicest to her. They go on a school field trip and find out that their town had the most witches who were executed back when that was a thing, and this is something that really affects our main character because obviously these women were just different. She's different. And if she existed back then, she probably would have been killed for being a witch. Now, I talked about this pretty extensively in my weekly wrap-up, but I used to live in Edinburgh. I used to do tours while I lived in Edinburgh. So this is a subject I definitely knew about, and it's a subject that has pissed me off to no end for many a year now. Because the only time you're going to find a plaque about witches in Edinburgh is this plaque that basically says these women were evil and they should have died. And it doesn't say that, you know, they weren't actually witches and they shouldn't have died. It's just all sorts of messed up. So when this character decided that she was going to get a memorial built for these women and kept going to town hall meetings to make that happen, I just felt so connected to this character. This book was fantastic. I cannot recommend it highly enough, and if you like a good Scottish accent and you enjoy audiobooks, definitely check this one out. The last book on this list is another audiobook with a fantastic voice because that's Unprotected by Billy Porter. This is his memoir and he reads it himself, and because he's Billy Porter, sometimes he bursts out into song because he can do whatever he wants in my mind. Billy didn't exactly have the greatest upbringing, even though he has a mother who truly loves him. He also was bullied a lot. He also had a stepfather who took advantage of him, and that was something that he repressed for a very long time. And this book is not only about his upbringing, but about his roles in cinema, as well as stage, as well as his R&B career. There is just so much in this, and I really enjoyed listening to this audiobook, listening to him tell me about certain things, and then going to look them up on YouTube, because you can do that. And it was just such an immersive experience because of that. This is a very powerful, important book, and I highly suggest everyone get a copy and read it or listen to it. If you want to hear me talk more about these books, or other books for that matter, the playlist for my weekly entertainment wrap-ups is always linked down below. If you've read any of these, please let me know about it down in the comments below. On the way down to the comments, if you hit that subscribe button, that would be very nice of you. If you don't feel like leaving a comment, but want to make sure that I know you were here, just leave me an emoji or a smiley face if you happen to be on your keyboard. Some people have asked if there's a way to financially support this channel, so I set up a Ko-fi account, which is a digital tipping service. The link for that, as always, is down below. You can like and share this as you see fit, and I will see you very soon. Bye!